All right. Welcome, everyone, to the final garden hour of the 2025 regular season. I kind of can't believe that we've made it to the end of August already. It's so great to see so many of you online, and I'm happy to be joined by two additional guests tonight. We've got Cody Molnar and Dr. Maddi Shires, and I'm outnumbered by plant pathologists this evening. So we've got your plant diseases covered, and then I'll talk about some bugs. But for those of you watching along at home, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a desktop, we'll kind of deal with those at the end of every segment, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. If it's something that we can't get to or we don't have the expertise for tonight, we will give you some resources on where to reach out to and get your question answered, which this week, if you show up at the South Dakota State Fair, I know there's going to be a bunch of master gardeners there in the Hort building. But until then, we're going to start with, let's see, Cody, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
Hi. So I'm going to be going back to my roots, pun intended here, and talking about Phytophthora.
Awesome. And that is going to be a word that I haven't heard since grad school. And Maddie, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
I am going to be kind of doing an update that's kind of a combo of what I've been seeing and what Cody's been seeing on common garden diseases because we have quite a lot of them that have popped up this year because of weather.
Yeah, every other place in South Dakota besides Pierre has actually had moisture. So I will say my lilac bush does finally have some powdery mildew on it. But those leaves will fall off and I'm not too worried. But yeah, congratulations to every other part of the state that is not in drought right now. But yeah, can't wait to hear about these diseases. And I feel like I should grab my plant pathology textbook that I haven't touched since grad school and see what I don't remember. But looking forward to it. And Cody, it looks like we can see your slides just fine. So we will turn it
All right.
over to you.
All right. So yeah, I'll be talking about Phytophthora. So I realized last time I was on here, I never really introduced who I was. I was kind of caught up in the moment and was really excited about phytoplasma. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up on a small farm. We grew a lot of different things, but our main thing that we grew were various berries, mainly blueberries and raspberries, along with some apples. I got my bachelor's and my master's in molecular biology from Lehigh University, and then kind of wandered around for a little bit, but I eventually found myself at the Pennsylvania Department of Ag, where I joined the diagnostic lab there and did disease surveys for about 2 years, as well as some research on Phytophthora and a very odd disorder that we had there called rapid apple decline, which, as the name would suggest, apples would just rapidly die. Never figured out what was actually going on with that. In 2020, I moved out to Washington and I started working for Washington State University. At first, an extension for little cherry disease and the X disease phytoplasma. And then a year after that, I joined the research lab focusing on the X disease phytoplasma, where I was there for about 4 years. And I also worked on a bunch of other tree fruit viruses that were there. And now I'm here, and I'm really excited to be in South Dakota. I'm the Extension Horticulture Plant Pathology Field Specialist. So what that means is I'll be handling issues and outreach and education on diseases and disorders on a pretty wide range of plants, vegetables, small fruit, herbaceous annuals and perennials, turf, and wide, pretty much anything else. But I will not be covering any woody plants or row crops. That is not my territory. And that picture there is kind of to show what X disease actually does on cherries. So on the right-hand side, you see those beautiful, nice, big Bing cherries. I love the alliteration. And to the left, you see those very small, pale cherries. Those are infected with X disease. It is a very devastating disease. It does about 5 to 10% of the total crop just in the garbage. The cherries taste absolutely awful, and it has caused millions of dollars of damage at this point. So maybe someday we'll talk more about that, but that's kind of my background. It's a lot of phytoplasmas, but I started out with Phytophthora. So what are Phytophthora? Their common name is water molds, which is about half correct. They do like water, but they are not mold. Their scientific name, the group that they're in, are the Oomycetes, which roughly translates to egg fungi, which is also half correct. They do kind of look like eggs when they reproduce. Um, But they aren't fungi. They're actually something called stromatophiles, which in older literature is sometimes referred to as heteroconts. And that name probably doesn't mean much to anyone outside of someone who's very enthusiastic about marine microbiology. But that's kind of the point. They're not really related to anything that we're very familiar with on a common basis. Their closest relatives are actually brown algae. Um, Other diseases, though, are part of their family, like the pythiums and downy mildews. And they are very nasty plant pathogens. Two of the more prominent ones are like Phytophthora rimorum, which causes sudden oak death, can kill an entire oak tree in a matter of weeks, and Phytophthora infestans, which is responsible for lake blight, which many of us probably are familiar with as something a bit more that we would encounter here. And I have the two pictures of their reproductive structures. They have their asexual stage at the top. Those are called sporangia, or sporangium if it's one. And the bottom part is their sexual reproduction form, which is called the oogonia. And those, when they're mature, they release something called zoospores, which are how they get their name of stromatophiles. There are these weird kind of kidney bean shaped things with two flagellas. One is the stromatopalis flagella, which is kind of bushy, and the other is your normal flagella that you use to swim. They really like water, and most of them complete their entire life cycle in water. Their life cycle is kind of complicated because they can switch between the sexual and asexual reproduction kind of at will and oftentimes at the same time. They can also make these structures called chlamydospores, which are these hardened, basically, structures, I guess. I don't like reusing the same word so much, but they can exist as the chlamydospore for quite a while and kind of ride out any inclement habitats or weather that uh, they normally wouldn't be able to survive. So, what diseases do they cause? And there's a lot of different diseases that they are involved with. There's a lot of different leaf blights that are caused. Phytophthora infestans will attack potato, and Phytophthora nicotiana will also go after tomato. The one that they're most commonly known for are their root rots. On soybean, there's Phytophthora sojae. A lot of herbaceous ornamentals can get Phytophthora cryptogaea, and then woody plants can often be attacked by a few very nasty ones, such as P. cambivora. Um, these can often also occur above the ground, where they just kind of form these sunken-in cankers. And there's also some that will eat the fruit itself. Phytophthora cactorum is one of the most notorious for this in that it will attack almost any part of any plant. Now, there's hundreds of species of these, and it seems to grow more each year as more people do surveys, but there's really only 40-ish that are associated with disease. Most of these other ones just eat decaying leaf litter in streams. Um, well, what's interesting is each species kind of has its own tissue preference and host preferences. Some are incredibly specific, like Phytophthora lateralis will only attack a single host, Port Orford cedar, and it will only go on the roots. Others, like Phytophthora cactorum, can attack almost any plant and almost any tissue. And I've isolated it from pretty much anything that can be grown in Pennsylvania. So some kind of gross looking pictures now, a close up of the decaying leaf from Phytophthora infestans on a potato. The root rots that I was kind of talking about, which these are on apple from Washington. And you can see right around the soil line is where the plant dies. And that's pretty characteristic of root rots in general, but especially with Phytophthora because they like living in the soil, they like living in the water, and they like living in waterlogged soil. Fruit rots can look incredibly gross, and they're kind of known for having that grayish brown fuzz as the fruit decays. And this is capsicum on cucurbits. So if you have Phytophthora, what do? Well, as I mentioned, they love water and waterlogged areas. So if there's part of your garden or your plot that has really bad drainage, try to improve that if you can. That may not be possible, so I would just avoid planting in that area if that's the case. Fortunately, in contrast to phytoplasma, we actually have a lot of resistant cultivars and crops for these. So if this is something that you're struggling with, reach out to me and we can try to work out a list of various cultivars that can actually tolerate Phytophthora better. And because many of them are so specific about the host that they like, crop rotations can also help there. If you're having really bad Phytophthora infestans, you can switch to corn or beans. Phytophthora infestans can infect either of those, so they will be better off in that area. I really want to stress that fungicides do not work on these, despite that they kind of look like fungi, because they aren't fungi. We do have some chemical controls, like metalaxyl. I don't know if that's recommended here, so don't take that as a recommendation. But if you are dealing with a root rot, it's important for you to confirm what organism is actually responsible, because many of the root rots are fungi, and in that case, fungicides would be effective. If there are cankers above ground, you can try to prune them out. That may not always be possible because these things really do like to attack right at the soil level, and if you try to prune that out, you just removed your tree. And if you do have Phytophthora issues, don't plant the same plant back in that area. All you're doing is just providing that Phytophthora with more food. You either want to switch to a different plant or just not plant there. The chlamydospores that I mentioned before can remain viable for 3 to 5 years, but even if they're not as in the chlamydospore form, they can just survive on decaying organic matter for a very long time. So they kind of act like poison in the ground, and you really shouldn't plant the same plant back in because you'll just be giving them more food. So my references, I'm actually going to pause a little bit on this, and I want to thank Gloria Abad for the many excellent pictures she has taken and shared with me back when I was working on these. And if you're ever curious for a very long list of weird hosts, symptoms, and species that we found in the plant trade, there's the publication I had from when I was at the Department of Ag. And if it isn't available, just shoot me an email and I'll give it to you myself. And my contacts. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. It doesn't look like we have any questions, so you're off the hook for the moment. But if folks have questions about plant diseases and anything funky that might be in your garden right now, drop that in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the very end. But right now we will move on to Maddi.
All right. Maybe it will share.
I was gonna say, I see the whole PowerPoint so far. Like
There
we're
we go.
getting there.
Should be good to go now.
Perfect. Yep.
All right, awesome. Okay, so I am also going to be kind of talking through several different diseases and pathogens. I did want to add that if any of you have heard me present before and talk about X disease or little cherry disease, yes, Cody and I both worked in the same lab. That's how we knew each other. And I recruited Cody for this job. So we both kind of cross over on what we talk about. But anyways, if you heard Cody talk a couple weeks ago, he talked about aster yellows. And that is a phytoplasma disease, and I'm not going to talk about it tonight because he's already gave a great presentation about it. But I did want to mention that we are still getting a lot of emails. I don't even know how many Cody's had, probably 15 or 20 in the last couple of weeks, with suspected aster yellows. So feel free to keep reaching out to me or him if you have questions about that disease. So I don't know how many of you might be seeing your grass turning a little bit orange. I know that mine has turned orange in the last few weeks here in Brookings. And so that is very likely due to what we call rust. More than likely, you have heard of and seen rust before on some plant. It's very common. We do see it kind of all over the state. Some of the most common ones that we'll see it on is corn, both sweet corn and field corn. We'll see it on sunflowers, and that's on wild sunflowers, sunflowers in your garden, sunflowers in the field. We obviously are seeing it on some grasses. We'll see it on flowers like hollyhocks, and I have a few examples here in a second, but it is kind of common. It's very, very widespread. Rust is spread through the wind. It can either be introduced to South Dakota through windblown movement, or some rust can overwinter here if we've had a warm winter. So it's definitely important, if you have had issues with rust in your garden, that you dispose of that plant material at the end of the season. And I would recommend disposing of it through your normal trash service. If you compost it, that could remain, it could let it stay warm enough throughout the winter that the rust is able to be viable and start infection again next year. Our cooler, humid conditions are what drive the development of rust. Again, that's why we're seeing it a lot right now. And like many of our other pathogens, rust is very host specific. So if you see rust on a sunflower, your garden is not doomed. Sunflower rust really only likes sunflowers. So whenever we talk about rust, I always describe it, if you're thinking about corn, where it looks like you've dipped your hand into a bag of Cheetos and kind of put that Cheeto dust all over the corn leaf. It does look similar to that on most of our other crops. This here is sunflower rust, and that's usually on the back of the leaf, and it just looks like these little black, almost pimples that are all across the back of that leaf. So if you're starting to see rust, fungicide applications are an option. Most of the time, they're not necessary. However, if you've had rust in your yard, on your grass, you might be considering doing a little bit of some prevention for that. Typically, for our gardens, rust is a late season disease, and it's not going to affect your yields. If you're continuing to have rust issues year over year, you might consider utilizing some resistant varieties if they're available. There are some sweet corn varieties and sunflowers that are a little more tolerant of rust. They're not completely resistant, but they won't be as bad. Remove plants that could serve as alternate hosts. So this will be applicable to mallow or wild sunflowers. If you have hollyhocks or are growing sunflowers in your garden, you'll want to make sure that you try to remove mallow or wild sunflowers around that area to reduce it from being able to jump over to your sunflowers if it's on wild sunflowers, or over to your hollyhock if it's on mallow. And remove infected materials at the end of the season. So just as more examples, the picture on the left is rust on a hollyhock. So if your hollyhocks kind of start looking a little sad toward the end of the season, it's possible that they have gotten rust. And then the other picture is a close-up example of rust on grass, and that would be why our grass has an orange appearance. Powdery mildew. We're all starting to see a little bit of powdery mildew. Amanda even mentioned that it's probably on her lilac. So what is powdery? It is a fungal pathogen that mostly just produces white mycelia on leaf surfaces. It's typically on the top of the leaf. Powdery mildew is going to occur any time of the year, but we do tend to see it later in the summer into early fall, because we need kind of those warm weather and moderate to high humidity conditions, which is why a lot of us are starting to see it. What plants are affected by it? Everything. I know that's not the answer that we love hearing, but most of our plants have varieties that are susceptible to infection by powdery mildew. However, there are resistant varieties, so that is something to keep in mind. So there's some examples of powdery mildew. You can kind of see why it would be problematic. It's going to really cover that entire leaf or stem or bud, and it's going to reduce its photosynthetic abilities, and it will actually cause the leaf or bud to kind of die if it becomes severe, like you can see in that bottom picture there. We do also, you've probably heard about downy mildew. Downy and powdery are two different organisms. And so I just like to show this picture here. Powdery mildew is going to be that white mold-like growth that you're seeing, and then downy mildew would be the black mold-like growth. If you think that you've had downy mildew issues, feel free to reach out to us, because we don't see it very often except in sunflowers, and we try to document where we're seeing it at. So management overall for powdery mildew, again, there's tons of resistant varieties. Try to avoid water on the plant foliage as much as possible to reduce leaf wetness. That could be done especially by watering your plants in the morning, or like late afternoon. You just want to let the leaves have time to dry. Good aeration in the plants through pruning and plant spacing. So, don't be planting roses in a big hedge type planting, because that will have them all touching and it make it a lot easier for powdery mildew to develop. And if you're having a lot of powdery mildew issues, and plants are completely covered, you can consider removing those symptomatic plants because they are serving as a disease source. This is always, I love to get to show our gross tomato. We found this at a community garden a couple of years ago. We are starting to see a lot of bacterial rots pop up on our fruits, like our tomatoes. We're also starting to see a lot of them on leaves, such as peppers and tomatoes and a few other plants. These are typically caused by, as the name suggests, a bacteria like a Xanthomonas. Typically, they're not problematic, but it is kind of important to note if they do get out of control, you need to make sure that you practice proper sanitation and remove all of those infected plants so that that bacterium is not allowed to overwinter and start an infection again next year. This is a disease that Cody has been seeing a lot and been getting several emails about. So it is called black rot. We've been seeing it most specifically on brassicas. It can get on some other things, but it's really likes being on broccoli and cabbage and canola, those types of plants. Black rot starts with the V-like symptom that you can see here on the screen. It typically starts kind of at the ends of veins on leaves, and it works its way in. So black rot is a bacterial disease that affects many types of plants. And like I said, it kind of, it starts with a V-shaped yellow lesion. The lesion kind of gets bigger and moves in on the leaf. Those lesions turn black and the leaf dies, and I have some pictures on the next slide. There's no chemical treatment available because this is a bacterial disease, so fungicides will not treat it. I did find a few articles that said copper might help, and it had a lot of asterisks next to it. It could help. There's not a ton of evidence that suggests that it's did a lot of improvement, and it kind of got problematic to continue to apply that. So I personally wouldn't recommend using copper, but I did want to point out that there were some people that said it could help. Resistant varieties and removal of infected plants is your best management strategy because we're just removing that disease source. So these are some other pictures of black rot. You may have seen black rot in your garden and not actually known that that's what it was because it just kind of looks like a leaf dies. You can see it starts, kind of from those leaf margins and works its way in, and the lesions turn black. And then that top picture up in the left corner is cauliflower that has been infected with black rot, and you can see the rotting that's happening in that head. So it definitely can affect your produce. So it's one to make sure that if you think you're having issues with it, you reach out to me or Cody or the plant diagnostic clinic, and we make sure that we get it properly diagnosed so you can take some management steps. Fasciation. I don't know how many people may have seen fasciation. Cody and I have both observed it a lot this year. So this is fasciation on a squash, and you may be saying, what is fasciation? So it's not a made up word. I know it sounds like it. Fasciation is basically where stems become elongated and they become very flat. You can see that, this squash, it was trying to produce blooms off of the stem. And you'll typically just see it on one branch of a plant. I have seen it in roses and on different forest trees. We've seen it on tons of different fruits and vegetables. We've seen it on cherry trees. So it just kind of happens. The good news about fasciation is that 99% of the time, it's just an environmental thing. Maybe the plant took some hail damage and it kind of got a little confused about how to grow, or the damage actually caused it. And then it's usually, that's what we would consider it to be, as an environmental issue. There is a bacteria that can cause fasciation, but we rarely ever observe it. So if you're seeing fasciation, I would just assume that it's an environmental thing. And if you don't like the way that it looks, you can just kind of prune it out of the plant, or you can just kind of watch it and see what it does all season, because it's pretty interesting to see how that plant copes with having fasciated branches. If you've grown sweet corn this year, you probably saw corn smut. These pictures all came from Cody. So if you've never seen corn smut before, well, it's those little mushroom looking things coming out of the corn ear. You may have heard of corn smut in people eating it. I do not recommend eating it. It's very time and temperature sensitive from being a delicacy or being deadly, and you're going to end up in the hospital. So please don't eat corn smut. It's not worth the risk, and we do not recommend it here. But it has been all over the state in our sweet corn and our field corn. Stephen Robertson said that last week at Dakota Fest, someone said that they had lost a ton of their sweet corn yield because of the corn smut. So definitely one to know and be able to diagnose yourself. The management for corn smut is going to be resistant hybrids, crop rotation, and removal of infected materials. There's not a ton of fungicides really available to stop it, because it's one that it's not really, there's not a preventative or a curative fungicide available. In this picture here, you can see the corn smut. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you can see it right here. It's kind of that big gall looking tumor. We've seen corn smut on leaves, on ears, on stems. So it is very prolific and very prominent this year. And with that, that is most of my spill on diseases for this week. Don't forget, I'm also the manager of the Plant Diagnostic Clinic here in Brookings. So if you are having disease concerns, feel free to reach out to us. We can do diagnoses over email on pictures sometimes if the picture's good. And otherwise, if we need you to send in a sample, our sample cost starts at $25. And our average to provide you an answer for your disease issue is about 1 week. So that is everything I have. I have all my resources, and I am done.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no questions, but I feel like I need to recruit one of you for our off-season garden hour in maybe February so that you guys can talk about how to choose resistant varieties and what to look for in a seed catalog or your garden center. Because yeah, for some of those things that you're talking about that, fungicides don't work because it's not a fungus, or, there's just nothing out there to control it, being able to, take one step in integrated pest management early in the season might be helpful. So that's also
I
my
feel like,
plug for off-season garden hour.
yeah, I feel like Cody would be amazing at that. And we can work on an article maybe to release at the first of next year to help people out in evaluating that.
Yeah, because like a lot of the things we're talking about sort of right now as the season is winding down, folks might not remember by the time we get to February. So
Exactly.
yeah, so we will be doing a couple off-season garden hours. We'll have one in October, there'll be one in late November, and then we'll have February and April before we start up again for real in May. And then we will also have our garden and yard newsletter. We'll be continuing through the first week of October, and then we'll have a couple one-offs over the winter season until we start back up in the spring. So plenty of ways to get in touch with us during the off season when you're planning your garden for next year and maybe wondering, things to improve or something new to try. And when you were talking about fasciation, I was like, fasciation is fascinating, which I'm like, sure you've heard a million times.
That we talked about doing an article soon and just captioning it exactly that, some like
Yep.
fasciation, how fascinating or something. So yeah.
I know a lot of times on some of the various like gardening like subreddits and Facebook groups, you'll see people post really like pictures of really cool fasciation. So I know a lot of people out there do notice it. I think I might have had, especially when you get it on like the flower head, after you're done panicking about asters yellows, sometimes it is just a cool like plant development thing and it's not gonna like, hurt everything.
Spread.
Yeah, exactly. It's not vectored by plant hoppers. It's just a weird thing that happens. But yeah, no, it's always cool to see, like especially dandelions. That's one that I see pictures pop up a lot of fasciated dandelions. Ooh, let's see. We got
Yeah.
a
And while Amanda's looking at that Q&A, I was just going to add, if you're listening tonight and you've had a burning disease issue that you would really love to see an article over, feel free to email Cody or I. We're trying to get caught up a little bit on having written publications on horticulture disease. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll see if we can address it over the winter for you.
yeah, we'll have, I want to say lots of time, but then we have all like the winter meetings and other stuff that we're
Oh
doing. But yes,
yeah.
it is great to have a much bigger horticulture team than we've had in previous years, especially on the plant pathology side, because a lot of times people send in pictures of plants that something is looking weird on it and they want to blame insects immediately. And I look at it and I'm like, this really looks more like I am team disease because I don't want the insects to be blamed for everything. But it is nice to have the lab where we can test for some of that stuff, and then also folks who are much more familiar with what those symptoms and signs look like, on the fruits and the foliage. The
Yeah.
question though is just a general, our prior recorded sessions, are they going to stay remaining available? And yes, so everything from this season has been recorded and it's on YouTube, on the SDSU Extension YouTube channel, and there is a garden hour playlist. And then under each video for this year, we do have short recaps, so you can jump to whatever section you want. So if you're like, oh man, I remember Cody talked about root rots, you don't have to listen to this whole recording. You can just jump right to Cody and then bail after that. So yes, those will all still be up on YouTube once the season is complete. I think you can even go back and watch like the early days of Garden Hour, which I have not forced myself to do. There's only so much of listening to myself talk that I can handle. But yeah, so folks, if you've got more questions, throw those in the Q&A. I'm going to pop up some slides about insects. And honestly, I was like worried about my incoming spider picture, but all of your pictures of diseased and dying plants, I'm like, oh, the spiders aren't so bad. All right. Here we go. So I am starting off with adorable tiny butterflies. So we've got a little bit of a palate cleanser before we get into the spiders for anyone who is arachnophobic. But I wanted to highlight skippers. So skippers are these really cute, small-ish butterflies. They're usually anywhere between an inch and 2 inches in wingspan. We do have an endangered skipper, the Dakota skipper, which is in the very sort of northeast corner of South Dakota. But sometimes people look at skippers and they wonder, is this a butterfly? Is it a moth? It's still a Lepidoptera. These are in the family Hesperidae. So they're their own little family altogether. And I just have two here, one from, sort of in town in a garden, and another one that I found out in the grasslands while I was getting eaten alive by what I think were chiggers. So shout out to everyone who gets really itchy from chigger bites. I am with you. I feel your pain. I also attempted to like look up real quick to identify these skippers to species, and then I realized that in the South Dakota butterfly book, the chapter on skippers is like, a solid almost fifth of the book, and I abandoned my quest. So the skippers will remain unidentified for now. But yeah, they're just some really cute little butterflies. We've got a pretty high diversity here in South Dakota, as evidenced by the giant section that they occupy in the Butterflies of South Dakota book. But as you're observing some of your fall flowers, you might notice these cute little guys. And they're characterized by not only their small size, kind of stocky bodies, but they do have clubbed antennae. So when you look at their, adorable little thread-like antenna, you'll see that the ends are kind of visibly rounded, and that is really characteristic of the family. So keep an eye out for skippers. And also while you're in your garden this time of year, it is garden spider season. So the argiopes are out and about. The females are the larger of sort of the sexes in the species. But yeah, there are really nice generalist garden predators. A lot of times, like I found this one in my tomatoes. I was actively picking tomatoes, hit a web, and spied my friendly neighborhood garden spider. So yeah, they do make really large webs. if you are a person that has properly spaced your tomatoes, unlike myself, you might notice that they will sort of build their webs like in between the tomato cages or like in between the plants. So they get sort of like the most airflow and chance of catching other critters. In my case, she was really, in the foliage. I apparently don't believe in plant spacing, or my tomatoes just really don't know how to behave. So these are harmless. A lot of people freak out because of their large size, but really that makes them pretty easy to spot. And they are pretty handy to have around. So you can always relocate one, if it's in too much of a high traffic area, throw it like back in the brush pile or, in a lilac bush or something if you, get freaked out seeing it in the garden. But I am, as you all know, team spider. So let these handy ladies hang out in your gardens. And I did check in on the monarchs to see how they're doing, and migration is beginning. So, especially for those of you in the northeast corner of South Dakota, you're the ones where you might start seeing monarchs roosting first. We've got reports out of Michigan and really northern Minnesota of roosts being spotted. And what happens is the monarchs that are sort of becoming adults now, they go into what is called reproductive diapause. So they're no longer mating and laying eggs. They sort of like a switch flips and they're like, you know what? We are just flying. We are not doing any of the other stuff except grabbing some nectar and hitting the road. And so they kind of start to mass up. And so they kind of join all their buddies and start heading south to Mexico. And then at night, they will, pick a tree and all hang out in it. So you might see just, a tree that is coated in monarch butterflies, which is really cool. It can be kind of hard to see that because, each root, each, clump of monarchs will sort of pick one tree. They'll be there for one night, sort of weather dependent, and then they'll be on their way. So it is a very like transient phenomenon. So I know in previous years, some folks, from sort of like the Huron area east have seen roosts, and that's really cool. So you can also always check in on Journey North to see the maps of where the monarchs are being spotted in their roosts. And, if you're on sort of our I-29 corridor, sort of, Jim River East, you guys are really sort of the Monarch Highway in South Dakota. So keep your eyes peeled. And if you'll be joining us at Insect Fest on September 6th at McCrory Gardens, we will have tags. So we will be tagging monarchs. So fingers crossed, I'm sure the liatris there is blooming really nicely, and that's usually what we use to like snag the monarchs, throw a sticker on them, and send them on their way. So maybe the off-season garden hour in October, I'll have a report on how our tagging effort has been going. And then yeah, fall flowers equals fall pollinators. So if you've got stuff blooming in your garden now, yay, keep it blooming through the first frost. I feel like I was on a climate webinar last week that was showing the 50-50 frost maps for the North Central region, and that information is available on our South Dakota Mesonet page, and I'm pretty sure we have an article somewhere on the website with the map for South Dakota. And here in Pierre, our 50-50 frost date is usually some like end of September, early October. Last year, I think our first frost wasn't until November, which was absolutely bananas. But I've got sunflowers. They are wild sunflowers. So if I was worried about any disease bridging, I have a lot of wild ones in my yard. But those are currently just getting loaded with bees. And then I do have some volunteer morning glories that just keep self-seeding, and I just keep letting them come back, and the bumblebees are really enjoying those. I know my stonecrop sedum is getting close to blooming. That is usually at peak bloom in sort of mid-September or later where I am. And I know that one is always really attractive to pollinators. So if folks have good fall flowers that you like, maybe drop those in the chat to share with your fellow garden hour attendees. I know we've got a lot of good asters. I've got, I want to say it's maybe a New England aster. My zucchini has slightly overtaken it this year. However, it is on the drip irrigation, so I think it should be much happier than it was in previous years. So I should also have some good fall insect and fall flower pictures when we reconvene in October. But yeah, the bees that, especially honeybees that are trying to keep their hive going throughout the winter, they really need fall nectar sources. And then the monarch butterflies that are migrating through also really need fall nectar sources. So I know it can be really tempting to want to clean up your garden kind of like immediately as soon as it starts to even get a hint of coolness. But we really want to leave some of those flowers out and then also leave some of that nest material so that our bees that were maybe ground nesters or stem nesters can hang out until spring when it's time to emerge again. So resist the urge to like nuke everything in your lawn, in your yard, except maybe if it's got a disease issue. That's kind of the one our sanitation caveat if you're trying to prevent some bridging of diseases between seasons. But as always, I'm like, think of the bees. And then upcoming events, I mentioned at the top, we will be at the state fair. So this week, I know the horticulture building, Sydney and Robin were judging the entries today. So they said they had quite, I think, over 1,000 entries, which is really cool. I can't wait to see what people have entered into the state fair. I will be there on Thursday giving a talk. I want to say I'm at like 11 in the morning. I know Robin is speaking on Thursday as well. So you can check out the Hort Building speaker schedule. I know quite a few of us are on it. For Thursday, I believe Dr. John Ball will be there on Sunday. So yeah, depending on what day you're visiting the state fair, you might see one of us. And then also the Master Gardeners will be tabling in the horticulture building. So they'll have resources. If you haven't picked up a garden journal and want to grab one, they'll have some of those there, as well as some of our other publications and, seed catalogs and all kinds of good stuff. So stop by the Hort Building. It's nice. It's like cool, quiet, not as crowded as some of the other ones. You can kind of check out the exhibits, maybe have a seat, say hi to the master gardeners, and grab some resources. And then yeah, ending the season with Insect Fest, September 6th from 1 to 5 at McCrory Gardens. It's a great time to see the gardens. There's usually a lot of stuff in bloom. I know it's been probably about 3 weeks since Sydney did her update, so it'll be your chance to see in person what's new at McCrory Gardens. But yeah, looking forward to that, crossing my fingers for some good weather. But with that, I will get out of there and check out what we've got in questions. Oh, somebody had 2 monarchs yesterday. Awesome. Yeah, I keep having like 1 or 2 that are kind of like flitting through my yard. And I think they are also in sort of like fall migration mode because they're really not hanging out for very long and they're hanging out in my trees. So let's see. When can you cut down the milkweeds? So I cut down a couple because I needed to get them out of the way so I could like mow my grass properly. But so some of the milkweeds are already starting to senesce or like turn yellow and drop their leaves. And a lot of the common milkweed does spread by like roots and I think rhizomes. Again, I took botany a very long time ago. Um, but so it's not that if you don't want all the seeds floofing around, you can go ahead and like, trim those back, especially if they're in areas that are maybe going to be falling over onto your sidewalk or, whatever. One thing that you can do though is if you have a place in like your compost pile where you can just kind of like stack up the stems because there are some insects that will use those hollow stems as nesting material. So if you're not destroying them, like you can just like move the cut stems to another area of your garden, and anything that might have, nested inside them will still be able to emerge next spring. Don't just like run it through the wood chipper or like break it into little bits and burn it. But you can do some, you know, necessary cleanup. I know I have some that are out front, and once those fall over, if they fall over in the public sidewalk, that's when people get mad and yell at me. So, um, trying to avoid getting the city enforcement officer called on me this year. So, um, but yeah, and let's see. Oh yeah, Russian sage, hollyhocks. My hollyhocks are starting to come back. I need to take a picture of one. I have like a dark maroon one that came up from I don't know where. But I have a lot of hollyhock weevils and they really do a number on the hollyhock. So we're in sort of like a lull year while all the hollyhock weevils starve, and then we'll see what happens next year. But yeah, Russian sage, that one is a really popular landscaping plant, and I know a lot of the green metallic bees really enjoy that one. So they can be really hard to get a good picture of, which is why I didn't share a picture of them because all of my pictures came out terribly. But if you've got Russian sage, definitely check it out. You'll see a lot of cool, small, shiny bees. But yeah, let's see. Ah, yes, brown-eyed Susans, also another good choice. Cone flowers, if they don't have aster yellows, are should be doing pretty well. I have like my one little echinacea like out front that just struggles, and it, has a couple blooms on it this year, and I'm like, don't get aster yellows. Like, you're just short, you're not like diseased. So now that we all have the search image for some plant diseases to end the season, I'm a little bit paranoid. But yeah, Maddi, anything that you're planning sort of for next year's garden that you're excited about?
Um, a little bit. So I bought a house 1 year ago. And so I'm actually having time now to plant plants. So I'll be kind of excited to see what actually comes up next year. And also figure out how to deter the rabbits so they don't eat all of my tulip bulbs again this next year. I planted like 100 tulips, and I think I only had about 30 or 40 of them come up. So I was a little sad.
Oh no.
But
Although I feel
but
like
yeah,
Macquarie also had issues with their tulips, so it might not have
they
entirely
they
been the
did.
rabbits. It could have also been some of the weather in Brookings. So it might not be totally totally your fault there. But I do a lot of like chicken wire fencing around
Yeah.
like my young I planted a stick of a thornless honey locust on Arbor Day this year. So like that has fence around it. I have a couple other little shrubs that I have not fenced previously, and then the rabbits just like eat them in the winter. So there's gonna be some defensive installations, before the snow flies.
Yeah, I would love to plant roses. Seeing how terribly the roses overwintered last year in the McCrory Rose Trial. The arts trial at McCrory, I guess I should say.
Mhm.
I am probably not planting roses. They had, I think, roses planted out there, and all of them died over the winter. So
Wow.
um, it was not. And then just obviously, I said I had orange grass, so I got to figure out this rust issue because it's the second
Yeah.
year,
Oh no.
and I don't have a lot of grass as it is because I have a problem with creeping Charlie, and
Mm.
yeah. So
Yeah, my lawn is mostly not any sort of grass, which is
yeah.
fine. It's fine. But yeah, Cody, anything you're planning to plant for next year? Any like successes from this year? I know you just moved to South Dakota, so I'm guessing
Yeah.
you probably don't have a container garden real quick.
It's fortunately someone also on the panel is letting me use her yard for plants. So I brought some of my family's berry bushes,
Oh, cool.
raspberries, because so hard to find black raspberries. And in weight of the rabbits being a problem, they ate most of the new shoots on them.
Oh no.
So hoping we kind of get them going along. I do have some containers. I'm gonna try to get some tomatoes and some squash. It's pretty standard stuff. Um, I plan on increasing my houseplant collection. I need good houseplants.
I was gonna say I
So
remember
15 or
the
20 is not enough.
Oh, nearly enough.
I feel like I have cats, so that really cuts down on the ability to have houseplants. We bring them down to here at the regional center. We've got a couple on our windowsill. But yeah, next year, for those of you who aren't master gardeners in the audience, if you join the 2026 Master Gardener training class, there is usually a hands-on session about plant propagation. So Cody, that's your incentive to just like, show up at a couple of the trainings and like help with plant propagation. I remember Dr. Lang let us other instructors do some plant propagation because I'd never sort of tried it before because again, bugs. And I got a couple, plants for the office out of the deal. And I think one of them actually got reused for plant propagation this year because it definitely got a haircut after the class happened in Pier, which it needed. It was getting kind of big.
Well, true to my pathologist nature, I have a Christmas cactus with impatient necrotic ring spot virus. Has these beautiful circular necrotic lesions on it. It's wonderful. Plant hates it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the plant is unhappy and nobody wants like starts from that.
But it's such a beautiful diseased plant.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
guess
the danger of plant propagation. Make sure you're propagating clean stuff.
right, yeah. So we're gonna like quarantine the plant pathologists. So with a Christmas cactus, which is notoriously an inside plant,
Yep.
how does it get a virus? And then if you have that plant with a virus, if you have another uninfected Christmas cactus, like can it get the virus inside?
So that virus in particular is spread by thrips, which just
Ah.
congeal out of the air. I don't know how they move, they just appear wherever you are. So that one actually is a danger to other houseplants because it is so easily transmitted.
Hmm.
Fortunately, thrips can't move a lot on their own, so that plant stays in its own room downstairs on the windowsill away from all of the other plants that can carry it.
It's like very physically quarantined. Yeah. Thrips are their fun own little like order of insects, and they don't actually have membranous wings. Their wings are actually sort of like a structure that has like hairs. So like we call them like feathery wings. But yes, they interact with air the way like we interact with water. So they're kind of like swimming. Yeah, it's bonkers. Insects are bonkers. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, which, that's fine. Everyone is their minds have been blown with all of the plant pathology terms because I was like, oh man, this is bringing back some memories. But yeah, there are a ton of plant diseases out there, and I feel like, that's some of them don't really get diagnosed because we're like, yeah, the plant's like the leaf is brown and shrivelly. I'm just gonna like pick that off and yeah, the rest of the plant kind of like, recovers or it's not entirely like immediately fatal. So we're going to really increase
Yeah.
everyone's knowledge about plant diseases
And
over the next couple years.
incentives for potentially reaching out to me or Cody or the diagnostic clinic to report your plant diseases is that Cody's trying to make a survey that is going to like I don't even know. He has all the ideas, but he's trying to make a survey that will eventually become kind of like a guidebook for these are all the diseases that we see in South Dakota.
Yeah, that which will be really awesome because I think it's, like many things in South Dakota that haven't been sort of really documented because no one has looked or just like sort of thrown it together. So, yeah, excited to see where that project goes and to continue working with you both. I'm super happy to have another Pennsylvanian on the team. When you said you're from Western Pennsylvania, I was like, okay, so that was definitely Steelers country. Where
Definitely.
are you on the yin scale?
Solid yins. I
Solid
don't
yins are
know.
for
I got
everyone.
my room.
Yeah.
Uh,
For everyone who's not from Pennsylvania watching, I'm apologies. I will give a shout out. My mom started watching Garden Hour and she's a master gardener in Pennsylvania. So hi mom. Thanks for watching. But yeah, it's been a great season. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you again to Maddi and Cody for hopping on tonight and telling us all about plant diseases. We are done with the regular season, but we'll be back the first Tuesday in October for our off-season garden hour. So you signed up for this, you'll get an email with the registration information for the next round, and you can always check out the events page on the SDSU Extension website. So hopefully we'll see a few, if not all of you, at one or more of our off-season events. Catch us at some in-person events coming up this winter. Otherwise, we'll see you all May 2026. And until then, happy gardening.